Hi, everybody. I see we already have a lot of very punctual people. Welcome to our Growing Our Future webinar. We're going to be just starting in a couple minutes. Also, we seem to be having some problems with the chat function, so we're working that out. We do hope to use it. Bear with us. Usually we have some nice music going on, so we'll just embrace the silence for now. All right, everybody, since you're punctual, we're punctual, we're going to start. We did have 150 people sign up for this, so I imagine we'll have some folks trickling in, but we have a lot to cover, so I'm just gonna get going. First, just want to thank you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to our latest and greatest Growing Our Future webinar. My name is Sandra Sura. I'm Managing Director of Forum's US office. And I did want to have everyone get the chance to introduce themselves at a certain moment, maybe we don't know when. I might offer that we'd love to hear from each one of you, so everyone gets to know who's here and what questions they're holding. But oh, I've been told the chat might work. So I would love to welcome you before we get going. Let's see if it does. Please put in your name, your organization, and we'd love to hear a question that you're holding. Hopefully we can address it today. If not, we certainly want to know what these questions are as we kind of center our work and what we're all grappling with. So do introduce yourself. All right, so is it working? Great, there we go. Lovely to see that going. All right, so we'll just share what we're going to do today. Mary, if you can get to the next slide. We're going to share some of our latest findings and some collective research we've done with the 135 organizations participating thus far. We certainly want most of this conversation for you to hear from some incredibly inspiring change makers that we're lucky to call participants in this Growing Our Future webinar. So we're going to be hearing from them about some of the live opportunities and challenges that they've been having and their thoughts on what it takes to drive a just and regenerative future here with us. So before we kind of get going, sorry, Mary, next slide. Just want to take a second. Some of you are new to Forum, some of you are longstanding partners, but just to give you a sense of who we are, we're international sustainability nonprofit that centers a practice of systems change across some critical sustainability challenges. We work one-on-one with organizations that want to drive transformational change and also where we see barriers to systemic progress. We bring change makers from across systems to work together to try to unlock them. And that's certainly what we are trying to do here in Growing Our Future. We also host the School of Systems Change, which aims to equip change makers in a systems change practice. So that's who we are. On to the next. We'll just tell you a little bit about Growing Our Future. So many of you are already involved in this. It's a system-wide initiative where we've brought 135 organizations across the system together to talk about and drive acceleration towards a regenerative agriculture system. We're proud and thankful that so many organizations have been a part of this. This is very much a partnership and collective collective work. I just want to address that it's really a critical time to be doing this work. On the one hand, there's never been more momentum in the regenerative agriculture space. You know, a lot of that is largely driven by the contribution of the agriculture system to the climate crisis. And a lot of the interventions have been really focused on that. And, you know, we collectively have felt that there is real risk of all this activity trying very specifically to address the climate crisis to not really challenge the root causes of the negative impacts of the system. And so that's what we've been trying to do collectively together. We've been very focused and proud and thankful to be building a diverse community of agriculture actors and bringing everybody together to think thoughtfully about how to shift this very entrenched system. Before we really dig into it, I guess I'll just say, because we just for those of you that are new to this has been a long-standing process. So we went through a long collective diagnosis process to understand those barriers. And then over the last year have really focused on 4 interventions and pathways that we think are incredibly important. So Mary's going to talk a lot about the findings that we are doing. And of course, we'll hear from our panelists about financing the transition, thinking thoughtfully about just regenerative policy, looking at social outcomes and pathways to market. So those have been the particular focuses of the last year and what we'll talk about today. And so it's always important for us to kind of center the purpose of this work and what we've been trying to do together. These are the goals that we've kind of collectively named and designed this work together. So, you know, we recognize that the system, no system is broken. It does exactly what it's meant to be designed for. So just recognizing that we're looking of transferring a system that is extractive, that values economies of scale and specialized production, that maximizes calories produced, externalities, that externalizes environmental impacts, that values competitive price reduction for consumers and maximizes profit in the supply chain. Those are all attributes of a current system, and that we're looking to shift to a system that delivers equitable economic prosperity, allowing people and the planet to flourish long term. And you see lots of different elements of that have come through the research and through the conversations across the board. We want to restore ecosystems, localize and diversify production systems, maximize nutrition and public health, foster resilience and an ability for the living elements of the system to thrive and adapt, foster the connection between how goods are made and those that consume them, and deliver racial justice and distribute value equitably. Not easy work, but it's important that all the interventions that we're trying to design together are jointly contributing to these outcomes instead of what we were talking about before, just specific climate focused outcomes. So that's what this work has been about, a product of collective thought and action, and thankful to go through some of the learnings. I'm going to hand it over to Mary.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandra. So what I'm going to do is kind of dive to this next level down a little bit to take stock of what's been changing in the regenerative agriculture movement here in the US, particularly over the last 2 years, to think about where activity is helping to take us towards that future vision that Sandra just laid out, or where it might be at risk of delivering that shallow transition. And so just for context, in 2020, when we started the Growing Our Future community, we started with a collaborative systems diagnosis, and through that process identified 10 leverage points. And leverage points just mean particular places within a complex system where a small shift in one thing can really help kind of create ripples throughout the system that we're trying to create in the future of a just and regenerative agriculture system. So in our report that we published back in June, we revisited those leverage points to say, in the last 2 years, where are they taking us towards that vision? Where might they be falling short? Where are there high levels of dynamism? Where are there needs for more activity? So I'm just going to pull out a couple of the highlights from this. If any of this sparks interest, I would encourage you to check out the report in full, available on our website. But policy is at the top, really high area of dynamism. That was before the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And there are plenty of folks on our panel who have much more expertise on agricultural policy than I do. So I'm not going to go into details here, but just acknowledge that we are seeing historic levels of investment in the future of our agriculture system, and recognize that the potential for these changes to really get us towards that just and regenerative future will come down to the implementation of those investments. Then looking at recognizing and valuing ecosystem service marketplaces compared to 2 years ago, this is happening. This was something that was just sort of an emerging opportunity that people were starting to see on the horizon in 2020. Now in 2022, there are several different marketplaces that are live, experimenting with how to make sure that there's some robust verification processes in place for those ecosystem service marketplaces. This is exciting because it's an opportunity to think about how we can shift what have previously been externalized costs of agricultural production. But we also know that there are some risks that come along with this new revenue stream, wanting to think about how it's really benefiting farm communities and providing adequate incentive for the changes farmers are making. And also making sure that this new revenue stream is accessible and fostering social equity. It's tough for growers with smaller acreage. Currently, there's a risk that there's not accessibility for Black, Indigenous, or farm communities of color. So those are things we want to think about in terms of how those marketplaces can really set us up for that future. Then looking at the business case, again, some good news. In the last 2 years, we've seen over 30 new businesses making regenerative agriculture commitments in one form or another, to varying levels of ambition, but indicating, I think, that the business case is starting to really solidify for some of the world's largest either food or fashion companies. But I think we also want to kind of recognize that the business case is also linked with consumer demand, which you can see here has been quite low in that level of dynamism. Back in 2020, when we identified these leverage points, the community acknowledged that this was probably unlikely to ever be a consumer-driven movement, but still wanting to kind of foster that connection with consumers. In this time of high food prices and inflation, that certainly seems to have kind of continued to be the reality. That link with consumers will be important, but unlikely perhaps to drive the business case. Rather, businesses are really seeing the need to invest because of the pressures of climate change and other things on their supply chains. Looking at financing the transition, this is obviously in part linked to the ecosystem service marketplaces, but in general, over the last 2 years, we have seen both the increase in quantity of capital and investments available, but I think even more importantly, some really exciting innovations in the quality of those investments and really putting farmers at the center of how those financial tools are designed, building in some of those elements of longer term thinking to help those financiers or help those farmers access financing. That being said, we have a long way to go to reach the number that the Croatan Institute identified of $700 billion needed to really support the transition to regenerative agriculture over the next 30 years. Looking at empowering farmers to enable grassroots coalition building, this is also an exciting area where we're seeing dynamism, particularly with the Farm Bill on the horizon. We're seeing a lot of exciting activity from the Native Farm Bill Coalition, folks like the National Young Farmers Coalition as well. And I think the outstanding question here is the extent to which mainstream actors and policymakers will listen to these grassroots mobilization and coalition building efforts. Then I'm going to talk about the investing in infrastructure and strengthening routes to market together. This is when we're starting to get into the area where we're seeing maybe 1 or 2 interesting signals indicating that these leverage points are starting to move, but maybe not quite the level of activity that we would really want to see. And so what I wanted to highlight here was over the summer, an announcement from the USDA I'm going to try really hard to get this right, the framework for shoring up the food supply chain and transforming the food system to be fairer, more competitive, and more resilient. They announced a new framework under that heading to invest $2 billion in supporting some of these new pathways to market, investing in new infrastructure. But I think even more exciting than that dollar figure is the way they framed it up as really for the first time kind of elevating the importance of factoring in resiliency alongside efficiency and productivity, which for such a long time has kind of been the sole goal. So we're starting to see indicators of a more holistic view. I think one of the things that makes this feel not like it doesn't quite have the amount of energy we would like to see is that it's still relatively nascent, particularly from the business community. Really thinking about how to support more diversified farms seems to be sort of on the horizon there. And then last but not least, looking at the prioritizing nutritional benefits. In the last year even, there's been a couple of exciting research studies that have come out linking how something has grown to the nutritional quality of what is produced and really demonstrating that link between regenerative agriculture and health and nutrition benefits. It's still relatively nascent. The body of evidence is growing, but I think it's still relatively unknown or kind of untapped. And then also this piece around mobilizing landowners. This one still feels critical, but just recognizing in the current market, there's still growing competition for land and farmland, specifically competing with other needs around development, but then hearing from a lot of our farm community partners that access to affordable land is still one of the primary barriers, particularly for the next generation of growers. So that's a little bit of a whirlwind tour of the activity that has been happening over the last 2 years in the regenerative agriculture movement here in the United States. Next, I'm going to share a little bit about how the Growing Our Future community has identified particular ways to help shift and engage with these different leverage points. But before I do that, we're just going to open up a quick poll to see and hear from you. What do you think needs to change the most within the agriculture system? It could be on this list. It could be something you feel like we missed on this list. Feel free, but we're going to launch that poll and just take a minute or two to get your input. And it's a short answer, so feel free to either take this opportunity to be brief, or I think you get up to 500 characters, so you can really lay out what you think needs to change. We're happy to hear from you all. All right. I'm going to let folks type in their final thoughts here and get going with our next slide, which is just talking about a little bit more of the specifics of how this particular collaborative space has decided to engage on this. Michelle, you can just go ahead and close out that poll in a minute if you don't mind. Okay, so back in 2021 now, the Growing Our Future community, based on that systems diagnosis, identified 4 areas where they really felt like there was an opportunity for that group of folks to affect change towards our future vision of a just and regenerative agriculture system. These are spaces that were in need of collaboration to really shift, and also presented a high potential for impact. Up there at the top is policy, but really specifically trying to think about how we can help garner mainstream support for progressive policies coming from grassroots and marginalized farm communities. We also heard from some of our community members that there's a gap oftentimes between the sustainability and government affairs teams within corporations that might not always be working towards the same goals or working in concert. So we want to use this work stream to try and help bridge that gap. Then within the Financing the Transition workstream, we are delivering a cotton pilot in partnership with the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium. This has kind of 2 goals. One is to tangibly kind of understand how ecosystem service marketplaces can help farmers transition to more regenerative agriculture systems, how they need to work with other financial tools, but I think really critically trying to understand how these marketplaces can help ensure equity and access, particularly for smaller acreage growers, as well as Black, Indigenous, and farm communities of color. Then we have social outcomes. This is just recognizing that in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been an incredible amount of progress in terms of thinking about how regenerative agriculture can help deliver environmental outcomes that are often sort of what's bringing mainstream actors into the regenerative agriculture conversation. But based on some of the research that we shared in the report, doing a benchmark of those impact assessments and frameworks, most of them are leaving social equity behind. And we think that that's a really big risk for the future of regenerative agriculture. And so we're going to be working with our community members to develop resources for these existing frameworks to really think about how they can embed social equity as a critical component of success for the future of regenerative agriculture. And then finally, we have our pathways to market workstream. And this is really about how we build an understanding of the need to shift regenerative value networks that can support more diversified and context-specific regenerative farming systems. We want to highlight where some of these new solutions are popping up, and then also engage with folks like procurement teams at corporations to think about how they might have to think differently about the way they engage with farm communities that are transitioning to regenerative agriculture. So that is a little taster of some of the insights from the Growing Our Future community, as well as the report. But I think really, most importantly, have an opportunity to hear from members of the community directly about how they are working on regenerative agriculture. So I'm going to hand it back to Sandra and our other panelists.
Great, thank you, Mary. Well, it's my honor to introduce these 4 incredible people. I'm just gonna we'll just pretend, you know, they're stepping onto stage. I'll introduce the 4 of them, and then we're going to talk together for about a half an hour, and then everyone will have hopefully some time for asking questions directly. So first up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Raymond Sanjay. Hopefully he's here. You should be able to see folks at the top here. But he's the director of Tuskegee University's Carver Integrative Sustainability Center. His background's as a researcher and professor in ecology, including ecology and agroecology. He also leads a number of other programs at the university, and he's contributing to our Pathways to Market work stream. There, I'm starting to see folks up at the top. Fabulous. Emily, you're next. Emily Liscombe is the National Resources Director at the Intertribal Agricultural Council. She brings over a decade of experience managing tribal environmental programs in the West, and she's working on capacity building initiatives across the country with Native producers, including managing intertribal ag's regen nation certification process. So we're lucky to have her participating in our policy workstream. Meg Viriel, I'm sorry if I'm sometimes not saying your names right. She brings over a decade of experience in public affairs roles across the food and agriculture sectors. Right now, she's the policy and public affairs manager at Nestle, and she's spearheaded their founding role in the Sustainable Food Policy Alliance. She's also a policy whiz, so we'll be asking her lots of questions there. And she's participating in the policy change work stream. And then Mark Eastham, he works at Ahold Delhaize as the sustainable products lead, developing and implementing sustainability programs throughout the value chain. He has experience in regenerative sourcing and sustainable commodities across various crops, palm oil to row crops, and he's in our Pathways to Market workstream. So thank you, everyone. My first question for everyone will just be 2 minutes on how you and your organization right now are contributing to accelerating the transition to regenerative agriculture, so everyone gets a sense of your particular interventions. Emily, let's start with you. You're first up on my screen.
Sorry, I thought I had hit unmute well enough. Apparently I didn't hit the button hard enough there. So we do a lot of different things with regenerative ag, not just the Regen Nation Seal and Pledge, but we do a lot of education and outreach, both to groups and with individual producers, so people can come to us and tell us that they bought a plot of land and, you know, this is what my soil looks like. What can I grow here? How can I do this best? Or, you know, we can go to a group of people and talk to them about traditional practices that were used in their area and how those relate to regenerative ag, how they were the original regenerative ag, and kind of bring in the cultural connection and help people reconnect to that and understand, you know, what they can do using that place-based knowledge that science. And so I think that's probably one of our more unique aspects, is that we do work a lot with traditional knowledge, and we also work with people who are now on very marginalized lands because of removals and land grabs that happen and pushing people onto reservations. So there's a lot less capacity to be able to grow food and to have food sovereignty because of that.
Thank you, Emily. Meg, could you hear next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Meg Villarreal with Nestle. Nestle is the world's largest global food company, and we have a deep commitment to our climate roadmap and meeting the goals that we have set forth in that climate roadmap. One of which is to support regenerative agriculture systems with $1 billion investment over the next 10 years. And how that's taking shape, specifically in the US market, is to support farmers within our producer supply chain in putting in place regenerative principles on their farm. And so we launched actually a major dairy pilot program with one of our farms in California 2 years ago. And we're looking at expanding that out in the dairy space. And then we also belong to and are part of the ESNC, as Mary and Sandra mentioned earlier. We were one of the founding members of the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium and sit on the board. And so we're looking for ways to support a lot of our commodity producers through the work and efforts that we put in there, as well as specialty crop producers. We have and grow a lot of specialty crops, and it's an area that's harder to tackle. So we are excited to be a part of this panel, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Meg. Raymond, would you be able to share?
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so some of the interventions that we do, we definitely intervene and try to provide education on farm. We're at the Sustainability Center here in Tuskegee. We're also connected to Cooperative Extension. So there's a lot of one-on-one coaching and interventions throughout the Black Belt of Alabama. But we also have had some sustainable grazing workshops with producers in Georgia, immediately to our east, and Mississippi, immediately to our west. And then I've also done a lot for regenerative practices with fruit and vegetable growers through our organic team here at Tuskegee University. But additionally, one of the things that we've been very concerned and targeted about is actually providing education and forums for discussion about regenerative agriculture for African American growers, as well as folks that are interested in regenerative agriculture at the university, but also in the communities that we serve. So we've been having forums about regenerative agriculture over the past year, and just talking about the connections of the practices as well as the culture to the past that's kind of rich here in the Southeast, specifically with some of the contributions of Dr. George Washington Carver and Booker T. Watley. But looking forward to the rest of the panel, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Mark.
Thank you. And it's great to hear from all the other panelists on what you're doing around regenerative ag. And just for all of you who don't know who Ahold Delhaize is and what we do, we're a large global retailer. We have around 7,000 stores globally, around 380,000 associates, and serving around 54 million customers a week globally. And so in the US, we have brands like Giant Food, Giant Company, Stop and Shop, Food Lion, and Hannaford. And so we're the largest grocery group on the East Coast and the 4th largest in the nation. And so regenerative ag is a topic that we prioritize as a company. We have a global position statement. We focus on advocating for soil health measures, and we leverage certifications like Global Gap and SAI and Rainforest Alliance and many other certifications in our ag supply chains. But we really know we need to do more. And so in the US, we're taking a very specific focus on regenerative ag. With Giant Company, one of our brands in the US, we've donated over $2 million over the past couple of years to the Rodale Institute. And so that money is going towards Rodale to help support their farmer training program, help support their organic consulting services, which are one-on-one mentorship for farmers, and where they train agronomists with trained agronomists, and also research. And so we really believe this is an important initiative. We really appreciate the partnership with Rodale. They've been great to work with. But we'd like to do more. We'd like to scale those types of partnerships with our other brands like Food Lion and Stop and Shop in a regionally focused way where we can support local farmers in the areas that we operate. And so that's one piece of our strategy moving forward. In addition to that, we'd love to just continue to work with our national brand and larger suppliers to make sure that we're scaling regenerative ag in our broader supply chain. So not just in the East Coast and the areas that we operate. And also the last piece of our strategy is really multi-stakeholder collaboration. We can't solve this issue on our own. And so that's why we appreciate being a part of this group to really learn where opportunities exist for us to support, engage, and just learn from. So that's what we're doing now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Each one of you are doing such incredible work. And I think what we're hoping to have here is an honest discussion about what it takes to work together. And I just want to elevate two things that came out of that report that Mary talked about, that was with these four groups and the others, two simple principles. And the first one is that it takes everyone in the system to drive this transition. And I kind of want to talk about what does it take to make collaboration happen, and what what collaboration isn't. So Emily, I'm going to start with you. So how does collaboration support what you need in your own work, and where might it not?
So for us, collaboration is really important when people want to have real and true collaboration, because then they can learn from some of that place-based knowledge that's had thousands of years of scientific exploration. And we can, benefit from the fact that there are more lands available, more, marketing assistance, other things outside of the reservations. But I think where it doesn't work is that a lot of times we get contacted by people who just want to check a box and say that they worked with tribes or worked with Native Americans. And we have limited resources, and tribes have limited resources. And when a lot of staff time is put towards reviewing documents, attending meetings, providing participation, and then you get to the end of a project and they say, oh, okay, yeah, we never really wanted to do it that way, but thanks for coming anyway. That's really disappointing and really difficult. Because there's not the kind of resources to be wasted on that. And a lot of times we do find that people just want to check that box. And so that's a huge issue for us. And I think one of the other things that's really important for us in working with collaboration is that we find a lot of times that there's a really narrow view of regenerative agriculture. It really doesn't take into account that Indigenous worldview and the whole ecosystem function and looking at things as a whole. So like when I go out and I do education on regenerative agriculture, I don't just do education on the 5 basic principles. I do education on how you can protect your riparian habitats, protecting your water resources, making sure that you have enough habitat for your birds, for all your keystone species in the area, to be looking for your indicator species, pollinator protection, integrated pest management, adapting to climate change in your specific area. So we look at things in a much more holistic approach. And I think sometimes when we get into the more corporate side of regenerative agriculture, it gets narrowed so much that people lose that big picture and forget that these are like working pieces of a puzzle, and it will fall apart if they're not all there. I always say when it comes to ecosystem function, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, because the impact of the system working together is exponentially larger than the pieces of it.
Thank you, Emily. And Meg or Mark, in both, I'd love to hear kind of what you do, what we need to do inside of our companies to make sure that engagement and collaboration isn't a checkbox, is centering and valuing Native and other communities.
Mark, do you want to go, or I can take it first?
Yeah, go for it, and then I'll add on.
Perfect. I think that as an ag and food company, we are heavily invested in making sure that our producers and our growers succeed. And so I've seen examples exactly like Emily has talked about of corporate entities that don't have a vested interest in the food and ag system coming in and trying to participate in certain regenerative agriculture principles that are not holistically looking at the farm and the production system in totality. And so I think what we've really tried to focus on within our regenerative agriculture work, when we work with dairy farms or some of our specialty crop farmers and whatnot, is making sure that we are going at it with a holistic approach, that we are looking at all of the things that they need to do on that farm to be sustainable now and into the future. And so I think that forums like this are exactly the collaboration that need to happen. This has provided me and Nestle with an opportunity to look even beyond the producer spaces that we traditionally work in and understand more about what's happening with other producers and other commodities that we don't necessarily have a huge production in, and get ideas and garner ideas from what they're doing to implement what we're doing and supplement what we're doing with our producers. So these types of forums are critically important, and I would say especially for those outside of the food and agriculture community who don't understand necessarily that holistic approach that has to happen with farmers.
And Mark, before you answer, I'm going to throw in another maybe angle to make some differences. If you could share too, the journey of convincing senior leadership of the importance of centering farming communities in this work.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for us, I think, across not just this specific topic of regenerative ag, but of sustainability broadly. A lot of times the stakeholders that we have to influence are focused on selling product, sourcing product, making sure that our customers who go into our stores to buy product have product that's affordable. And so we're usually going to them with asks that seem far away. A lot of times these topics are really far away, they're upstream, especially with this. So, I mean, we're talking about farmers and influencing farmers and supporting farmers. And so we do, I believe everything starts really at the top. Your leadership has to have a mindset of the importance of sustainability broadly, the importance of ag. And I think that our leadership recognizes that ag is the basis of our business. Without ag, we won't be able to sell a lot of the products that we do within food. And so we have governance structures in place to really keep our leadership informed on a regular basis. We have steering committees, all the internal mechanisms that you would imagine companies have. We have those, and they require a lot of time and effort. And really, it helps us hold ourselves accountable as well as our leadership. But then I think also at the middle parts of the business, I think that's also really important. If you're talking to a buyer or a category manager, folks who are directly engaged in our suppliers, it's really important to empower them with the knowledge of what we're trying to do, specifically around regenerative ag and other topics as well. So it's really a bottom up and top down approach to educate, inform, and empower our business and our internal team members to prioritize this so that we can ultimately act against the strategies that we're laying out as a company.
Thanks, Mark. And so it's all kind of related, but just naming like the second principle coming out of this work is obviously that the transition needs to be farmer-centered and addressing equity alongside environmental resilience. And Raymond, I'm wondering if you could share examples where you think regenerative agriculture interventions are centering farmers and examples where they're not, whether they're intended to or not.
Absolutely. Some examples of where it doesn't work. I guess I'll start there. And we've had a lot of conversations with well-intentioned companies that are looking to source produce from Black and brown growers in our region. And those conversations usually go well with some of the people that are closer to the top. But once we get past those conversations and then we begin to talk about the bottom line and the profiteering, the whole concern for the farmer and the farm community goes out the door. As folks may know or may not know, a lot of farmers of color are dealing with distressed conditions, be that from past injustices, and then getting into the point where they're ready to enter into a relationship, a commercial relationship with a commercial supply chain. Usually, if it's not the actual market, it may be the distribution partner, does not have that same sensitivity to regenerative principles. And that's where a lot of our relationships have failed, with kind of pushing regenerative agriculture in our community to sustain our communities. But I can say that some relationships have went well, and some of the relationships are with smaller smaller chains. I mean, and it's of course more local, dealing with some of the schools and grocers in our state, in our area. Those have worked a lot better because they can kind of walk us through the entire process and have more of a say to, I guess, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. A lot of the issues that we have is not having the resources to actually make the transition to being GAP certified, to being organic, and the understanding by partners of that, who are willing to invest in that, invest in those farm communities, have produced benefits. But we do need more partners that have that understanding, more partners that are participating in forums like this, that can actually provide that equity piece to Black, Indigenous, and other farmers of color in the communities that they live in and serve.
Thank you. And would you be able to share, Meg and Raymond are both involved in ecosystem services program, and how that's been working and not working to bring that value to farming communities? Sorry, either one, Raymond, maybe you can, since you had the floor.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Meg take that. I'll actually share that we're kind of at the beginning of actually walking into this space. We are partnering with some other institutions that are outside of the region to work with small landowners on understanding carbon markets. We've got a long way to go there, and we've just entered another relationship with another larger organization that's going to help us with educating small farmers about other ecosystem service markets. But we're kind of at the very beginning of this. It's really new in our region and with the institutions that we work with as well. So we're looking forward to it. But I'll pass it to Meg.
Thanks. ESMC really just formally launched this spring, and so we don't have a whole lot of direct data yet to speak to about the efficacy of that particular market. But what I can say is there are a couple of things that have worked really well. One is that ESMC was really founded on the principle of bringing the entire ag community together. So everyone from producers to commodity groups to companies to our retail partners, we wanted to bring everyone along the value chain together to have this constructive conversation about what's going to be.
Meg, is it just me? You're
way to move forward. The pilots for companies
Meg, we might need to come back to you.
A lot of producer group to get that information and that data, figure out what is implementable. Oh no.
I'm sorry, Meg. I think we're losing you a little bit. Are you there? Well, I hope we get her back, because I also wanted to pick up on some of the policy work. We'll come back to you. Meg. I would like to invite, because I know we're getting close to our time, places where just if you all could kind of share the experience that you've had in an honest way with growing our future, and what has been giving you hope that the collaboration that we're talking about, that's centering equity alongside environmental resilience, is possible, and where we still need to work together. Emily, maybe we'll start with you.
It's not wanting to unmute today. So I guess I would say that the best part really is that it's bringing together partners who may not otherwise hear each other's voices and may not otherwise work together. And so I think it does help bring in more different perspectives and bring people in from different places. I think, that sometimes people not really wanting to collaborate, just wanting to check that box, that is one of the issues that has, come up with some partners that have contacted sometimes. Some have been great and really wanted to engage. And then I think, like I just saw a little bit of a disconnect even in this conversation here, because when asked, what's being done for equity, it was like, we do this with our farmers, we provide our farmers this. And I think that one of the things, and I think Raymond could probably, second this, is that when you are working with disadvantaged communities, a lot of times they're not in the position to be that farmer yet, but you might be using practices or paying other people for practices that have actually come from stuff that they're doing, that they've done for generations. And those practices are kind of then being rebranded and sold, and other people are being paid for those. But the people who have worked that land for years and kind of created those practices are being left out of that loop, and they don't have the ability in their marginalized lands to get into those. And like in the carbon market, that's another issue where a lot of times you have to be the landowner. Well, when it comes to tribal people, technically the federal government is the landowner. When it comes to a lot of minorities, a lot of times they're a leaseholder, not a landowner, or they're, on some sort of a cooperative agreement with the landowner. And so then they're automatically excluded from those programs, or they don't have enough acreage. And so the things that are meant to help people out for doing the right thing end up only getting targeted to those corporate entities. And so I think one of the things is to not just give some money to a foundation where people have to have a grant writer and a whole bunch of capacity and, a history of this, that, and the other to be able to get a grant from them to help them out, but to go directly to the disadvantaged communities and say, hey, we know that you've been disadvantaged. We know you've been doing these practices. How can we have some kind of cooperation together? Can we make an agreement where we pay you, X amount of dollars for all these things that you guys have done for generations, and that, will help you get this stuff started here, or will help you get some better land, things that will actually help move those communities forward. And I think sometimes that gets left out of the discussion because people are only looking at who is currently able to get into their programs.
I want to pause for one moment. I want to invite, it seems like we've answered some of the questions that folks have been asking have been answered. And I'd invite, if there are any other questions that you guys have that will aggregate in a Q&A, throw them in the chat and I'll try to get to them in a moment. I guess just to respond to Emily, Mark and Meg, are there any, Meg, from a policy perspective, any policy interventions, whether it's kind of what we're working on together or others that you think would help unlock some of the challenges Emily's talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry for the disconnect earlier, my internet dropped me. I think that one of the things that I was trying to mention before with ESMC is that we've identified a need with a lot of producer partners for technical assistance and information sharing, exactly as Emily and Raymond have both mentioned. And I think that there are opportunities to shore up some of what USDA does and some of what other programs do to create a pathway for greater information sharing and for greater technical assistance for producers as they embark on this journey towards regen ag. So there are definitely policy opportunities that exist that we're going to explore in the Farm Bill and in other avenues to really support producers.
Yeah, and from a retailer perspective, we would love to get connected with communities that need support and engagement. And Raymond, to the point you raised earlier, we'd love to get connected with growers who are doing the right things and implementing regenerative practices, and either support those practices or support through our business relationship. The only issue is that we're so far downstream. We deal with suppliers, and we have thousands of them. And so that is the challenge. And so that is one of the key reasons why we are here, is because we're so far removed from the farmer. And so I know a lot of you all and organizations that are involved with this work are connecting with growers on the day-to-day basis and supporting them and working with them and talking to them. And so that's one key piece that we are really excited about this group here and this multi-stakeholder collaboration is the opportunity to learn about opportunities for us to get engaged. And so that's really a key ask for us is to understand where those opportunities to engage farmers exist and how we can really more directly engage and support.
Anyone, could you maybe give your perspective as to what's been working and what could we continue to work on?
Oh yeah, I first want to start with the amen and ashe, words of affirmation to Emily. Completely agree with what she said, and really needs to be raised up in the conversation about regenerative agriculture. But I do want to say, in terms of this forum, guys have given us the opportunity to connect with people that are going to provide that information and resources to our clientele that we would never ever have. So ESMC, Chris Boesma and the Soil Science Society of America, two excellent groups that I met through this. Actually, I was a member of Soil Science Society in the past life, but now that I'm kind of boots on the ground, I kind of lost contact. But I'm really enjoying the potential that these relationships have to bring more resources to our farmers, more educational resources. But what I do want to say, and it's not a critique, I would say, about what you all do right now, but in terms of the longevity, in terms of the future outlook of the work, the forecasting and the work, with Black and Indigenous and farmers of color, and my mentor tells me this all the time, the work is generational work. So the help has to be generational help. When sometimes folks come, and Emily's alluded to this, and they come with help to the communities for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but after decades of discrimination, it's not enough to actually get us over the tipping point. So I'm hoping that the Forum for the Future and the relationships that are formed here are long-term relationships that actually uplift those parts of the food system and the agricultural community.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think earlier Mark touched on accountability, and that's a whole other conversation we could have, but there's accountability for all of us, to keep this going, right? So we're all doing that work. I think it's an important point. So I just want to elevate a couple questions that have come through. There's this theme around scale. So I welcome anyone to talk about whether this tension has kind of appeared in the work, but how do we scale the number of regenerative farms while also balancing the need to drive food production and nutrition? Would anybody want to jump into that big question as to whether scale is possible, appropriate?
I think you've asked the $1 million question, which is how do we scale? What works for one commodity or one specific type of crop doesn't necessarily work for another. And so there's a lot of different things that need to happen, and a lot of funding that needs to be invested in how to scale this to a much larger size. And I think, from a Nestle perspective, we're very interested in making sure that as the regen conversation continues, and particularly the conversation around carbon, that the carbon conversation is not decoupled from agriculture, that it doesn't become commoditized in its own right and becomes decoupled from the actual agriculture commodity. It's important to keep those together because it keeps the farmer and the producer at the center of the conversation as we move this forward. So I don't have a great answer about scaling, but there's a lot that needs to happen to have that be successful.
Emily and Raymond, just curious if any tensions around scale in the communities that you represent, whether there's ever been feeling of pressure or just not centering the needs of the communities. Just wondering if we can kind of raise anything to consider in a strategy that aims to scale across the country.
I think one of the issues is that there's a lot of problems with capacity to scale. People don't have more land to grow on. They don't have access to the capital to have more land to grow on. But I also am concerned about the idea that everything has to be a large farm. You know, America used to be a conglomeration of small family farms where people really cared about their land and their communities. And in my opinion, I don't see anything wrong with returning to more small family farms and people who really care about their communities that still will produce the same amount of food. I don't see that it has to be produced on a massive scale that, you know, requires corporatization.
And I know these are tensions that we're centering and working through all kinds of innovative platforms and across communities. But more soon. I do want to hand it over now to Mary. I want to thank you all for sharing honestly your experiences and the challenges, and thank everyone for your wonderful questions, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Mary to close us off.
Thanks all. It feels unfair to try and have such a rich conversation in just a half hour or so. So thank you for our panelists for bringing some of these tensions that we've been having and deep conversations and big issues that we face in our meetings and interactions with Growing Our Future, really bringing that to the surface. So just in the last couple of minutes here, would invite those of you on the chat who have been listening into the panelists to share anything that you feel like you're thinking about a little bit differently as a result of what you've heard from the panel. And then in the last 3 minutes, just want to take the opportunity to invite you all to continue to participate in the Growing Our Future community. It is an open community for everyone to participate in, so long as you are working towards this future of a just and regenerative agriculture system. So you can sign up for our newsletter. It's kind of a crowdsourced newsletter where we both share what's going on within the program, but it's also an opportunity for participants to share the work of their organizations are doing and garner support either for sign-ons or new events or new initiatives that you all are taking forward. So head to our website. You can sign up for the newsletter. That's the kind of lowest point of entry. But we would also invite you all to participate in these 4 work streams. And it will give you the opportunity to really dive into some of these issues that our panelists have raised today. Our next work stream meetings will be coming up in October. There will be a follow-up survey coming directly after this webinar. It will either pop up in your Chrome box somehow magically, or you will receive an email with an opportunity to fill out a survey. And then you can also indicate if you'd like to join us at our next work stream meetings. But this is really a collective endeavor to accelerate the transition to regenerative agriculture. I think as our panelists have highlighted, it is a complicated, long-term systemic challenge that we are trying to collectively try and make a contribution towards the future that we want to see. And so welcome many others to join us in doing that. So I think that's all from us. Thank you so much for joining us. The recording of this will be available as well. We'll share the recording and a little bit of a write-up for folks who weren't able to join us today.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day, the rest of your day.
Take care.